I guess we'll get started. I just want to say hello to everyone joining us. My name is Jazz, and I am the community manager here at Canadian Gap Year Association. If you're just learning about our amazing nonprofit, I'm a little biased. We are here to support you in your gap year journey. So everything from making the decision to the planning the stage, the exciting stage, to actually leading and implementing a purposeful gap year. We connect you with gap year programs. We also have a few amazing tools and resources in-house, from our gap year toolkit to our gap year game plan, which I'll go into a little bit more about at the end. But we're literally your gap year experts, and we're here to support you and be like the fun aunt and the cousin and the ones that are rooting you on and celebrating the small wins, because if you're just kind of tuning into what this could look like, a gap year, it's one of the most courageous decisions you can make for your young adulthood and preparing yourself for that next step, whether it's higher education or your future. But that doesn't mean it's easy. It's going to be challenging but rewarding, and you're going to grow and you're going to learn and you're going to expand and you're going to connect and you're going to meet amazing people. And this conversation, I think, is really, really valuable, because often when you are a student of color, there's challenges, there's a lot of cultural narratives. Our parents, sometimes it's challenging to just kind of open those vulnerable conversations with our parents. And oh my gosh, Nazra, I can't wait to chat with you more about this, because Nazra and AJ are both our CanGap ambassadors, and have been making incredible content for our YouTube videos, which I'll share with everyone a little bit later. But Nazra actually recently did a video around how to talk to your parents when it comes to making the gap year decision and including them. And it sounds like that was quite a challenge for you, but it gives some really, really great insight. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit more today as well. But I want to stop talking. I would like to introduce our amazing panel here. AJ, I see your mic is unmuted. Do you want to kick us off with just a quick intro to, I know it's hard, but like who you are, what you're up to, and also like a high level overview of your incredible gap year?
Of course. So my name is AJ, or Anuj Manchanda. I'm originally from Bangkok, Thailand. So I was born and raised there my entire life. And currently I'm studying at the University of Toronto, here in downtown Toronto, and I'm studying business and commerce. That's something that I'm really interested in, and something that I really wanted to explore throughout my gap year as well. So I really took my gap year as an opportunity to explore what I genuinely loved, explore what I was passionate about career-wise, and to learn new skills that I thought could help me in my near and far future.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Nazra, take it on. Take it away.
Hey guys, AJ, it's so glad to nice to meet you. I've seen some of your videos on the channel too. So I'm glad that we finally get a chance to connect. I'm Nazra, and I also was supposed to go to University of Toronto for computer science. And originally when I took my first year in my gap year, I honestly I was working for a startup. So I got this really cool opportunity to work for the startup. They're kind of in the education space. And it was such a crazy, wild experience. I was going to go to university for computer science. And this was just kind of a whole other world, in the startup world, working on biz dev things. And I had some really cool experiences. I got to travel a bit. And just like AJ said, I got to experience I got to explore with a few of the things that I was interested in and understand myself a lot better through that. So it was a cool year, and I'm really excited to hear AJ's perspective on his gap year and kind of know more of what he did as well. And super excited to be here. So thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Also, Nazra, we can't see you. Your camera just went off. Just double check.
So I can see both of you guys, and I can see myself. Are you?
Oh, AJ, can you see her?
Yeah, I can see her.
I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Well, that stinks. All right, no worries. As long as everyone else can see Nazra, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much for giving an overview. Now I'd love to obviously dive a little deeper. And I guess my first initial question is really when was the idea of a gap year introduced? How did that just get sprung upon you? Was it something you'd been considering for a while? Just give us an understanding of how that kind of was brought into your post-secondary options. Anyone can kick it off.
Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, sure. I feel like I don't know why. I just always had it in my mind, and I probably heard about it. Honestly, I think I also associated a gap year a lot with Europe. I think I just knew that it was kind of a common practice there for people to take a year off before they traveled, and I have a few cousins and friends that were like based in Europe, so I think I might have just heard it from them. But when I was like ready to take a gap year, I like initially wanted to work at the startup, and so I was trying to think of creative ways that I could do that, and when I remember the gap year, I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a great, simple way because most of the time the school will actually just hold your seat for you. So you can say that I'd like to take a year off, but you have your like kind of like admittance seat held for you. And so I was like, that's a really great option to be able to feel like it's not that big of a risk to take a gap year and also have like my options open. So yeah, that's how I heard about it, and that's why I decided to take it because it felt like it was actually it feels like it's a it can feel very intimidating, but I also felt like there was a bit of a cushion of safety to it, so that made it a little bit of an easier decision to make. Yeah, AJ, what about you?
Awesome. Yeah, I was not as well planned as you were. For me, I was quite skeptical about taking a gap year. So I was introduced to it quite early on. I was lucky enough to have a school with like counselors who always emphasized the potential value in a gap year. But unfortunately, me being quite stubborn, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to university. I wanted to, not waste more time. I'm already old enough. But then the pandemic hit, and it really like pushed me to reconsider all of what's important and my perspectives and the importance of gaining real world experience and how that can help me within school itself, because that's something I did more and more as the pandemic hit, and I wanted to continue that through perhaps even another year. So I think it's really that pandemic that pushed me to do so. But with that being said, if I could go back, even if there wasn't a pandemic, I think a gap year is an exceptional choice to make, and it can be really transformative. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think, we've obviously seen like a massive rise in the interest in gap years, and, just like this is the only option because there's a pandemic, which is very understandable. And I think it's also, um, you know, just finally catching up with yourself and having that intentional time to sit with yourself and be like, oh, there's so many pieces about myself that I haven't realized. I should take time to discover those. And we're not really presented that opportunity when we're in high school because we're just go, 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 go. And then summer, you just want to like break free and you're not really thinking of like putting intentional time into yourself. And, I believe the pandemic's definitely made that big pause. And Nazra, I actually don't remember which year you took your gap year. Which year was it?
Good question. It was, I think, so 2018 to 2019 is mine.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So the
So
year
definitely
before.
pre-pandemic. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And coming out of your gap year, did you find that the pandemic influenced any of your other decisions? Like AJ, I know you went into school. Nazra, was there any ways that the pandemic maybe impacted you a little bit as well after coming out of your gap year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic, like, it just, especially in Toronto, like I got to like go to the States, for example, this year for a bit, and I was living in the States, and like a lot of my friends there, their version of the pandemic and quarantine was only like a month, whereas like in Toronto, we've had it for like like we actually quarantined properly for around like 9, 10 ish months, and so I think for everyone it's a little bit probably transformative, and for me it was just very like I think just kind of like made me really think about just what my values were and what I wanted to do as a person. And I think I had a good sense of those like going into the pandemic as well. But it definitely was like a test of like how do I want to be spending my time, especially when you're given so much time as well. Like there's a period like I was working, for example, during the pandemic, and there's also a period then where like kind of like work slowed down for a bit and like things just slowed down for a second. And so taking time to just like really think about, okay, I have this much time. What do I want to do? Which can be so scary. And I know that's like one of the things that like people who want to take a gap year worry about a lot. It's like, what do I even do during my gap year? I know I don't want to do university, but I also just like have no idea what to do in this like in between period. And for me, there was just like a lot more figuring out of other passions. So like, for example, I'm making like music right now. And like, I actually think like the pandemic a little bit helped with that. I did go to LA this year, which is probably like the biggest thing that helped with it. But just kind of like allowing and seeing that there's I think if I had to encapsulate that takeaway, it's really seeing that there isn't just like one path. You don't just have to do like one thing. Even if you want to be on one path for the most part, even if it's like for the most part, I still want to be like an engineer. Or for the most part, I still want to do like X, Y, Z, A, B, Z. I think there's just so many other things that you can kind of involve in your path at different times, and that there's definitely a lot more room to truly explore your hobbies. Yeah, that's I think some of the biggest like lessons I learned, and they definitely do impact how I just make decisions on anything at the moment.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. AJ, did you want to add anything there as well, just in terms of that transition?
For sure, yeah. That for firstly was incredible. I really agree with everything you said and really resonate with all of that throughout my gap year as well. I think something just to add on is like I think the gap year served as a great opportunity for me to just take a step back. I feel like in university and in high school, there's always people telling you things and like things that you have to do. And there's never really a moment for you to just take a step back and reflect on your values, as Nazra talked about. Reflect on what you want to do, what drives you for success, what pushes you to do what you do, and why do you want to achieve such things. And I think that was really transformative for me. It really reshaped the way that I thought about going into university. Because before I was quite the academic student, and so I would devote like most of my time just studying all the time. But now I realize the value of developing relationships with other people, joining extracurricular activities, and finding ways to connect what I'm learning into school into the real world by doing passionates that I really care about and helping initiatives that I care about. So I think it was a really important way for me to initially understand my core values and then find ways to specifically implement that in my life moving forward.
Yeah, I would love to add on to that. It's like I really liked how you said that you're like there's so much go and there's so many people like telling you their opinions, and like I think an important part over the past like year, and so over the pandemic, and then also just kind of in a gap year is like you really get time to hear yourself. Like you don't get a lot of time to even like hear yourself, let alone know what yourself is saying. So those are two like different important things, like being able to hear yourself in the first place and just like hearing that there is a voice or multiple voices kind of like leading you in certain directions, and then being able to take time to like actually understand what those voices are saying and what those like instincts are saying and that gut is saying to you. Like that is a whole process, and it's something that like kind of takes a bit of like you need to spend some time in like silence and spend some time like in the quiet and like away from like those environments for you to even like get to the stage where you're able to explore what that is and what that intuition and what that gut and all those things are. So I actually really like that point, because I think that that's something that probably a lot of us can relate to a little bit. And Jazz, even you probably, I bet, like I'm actually curious to know what your pandemic experience like takeaway was and how that affects your decision.
Yeah, first of all, like very powerful, everything you both are saying. I think I'll be honest, I was pretty scared when everything first went down. I was in Chandigarh in Punjab, and during the time, so I think I mentioned that to you, Nazra. I live in India. So I was like feeling, I felt very trapped. I felt very trapped because like the lockdown was really intense, and I feel like that kind of shut me down for the first couple months, and also being so far from family was really hard. And after I started to like come out of that fear, I realized like this is so silly. Like I can't be so scared of this. Like this is gonna happen. It's happened many times in history. Like we can move through this, and finding time to sit with myself. Absolutely. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of reflecting, and that's it. I feel like the pandemic in general, and just it made me remember that like time is so precious. We're here for such a short amount of time in the history of the world, and that we shouldn't let these external things kind of stop us from being who we are and like following our dreams and starting those journeys. And that's what led me to move to the Himalayas, because I was like, that's the best way of life. I'm going up there. I'm going to go start farming and like doing all those fun things. And, that's, and I'm so proud of myself for like, finding the courage to go and make these bigger moves. And I think, and I think it's funny, like when I try to, a lot of current students are asking about, what can I even do in a pandemic gap year? And it's interesting because they, I give them all these ideas, and there is so many possibilities, because it's really based on your values and your goals. But what's the contrary to that is that, I find that now gappers are in the middle of their gap year and they're like, oh my gosh, there's too many things to do and I didn't realize it. And now I have decision fatigue and I don't know what to do next. And I'm curious, in having so much open time, and having maybe, either a few goals or, maybe throwing yourself like to the wolves and like, I'm going to do all of these things and I have to accomplish them in the 1 year. How did you navigate that in a way that nurtured yourself, still got things done, but, didn't overwhelm you and get you out of your head in that way? Just curious to what that might have looked like.
Want to take the first?
Sure. So yeah, for me, as I talked about, my gap year was predominantly within the pandemic. So things kept changing, as we reflected upon earlier. Things were all over the place. And so I knew that even if I set so many specific goals at the beginning of the year, things would change again. And that did happen. Some of the goals that I set to, travel to different islands and volunteer wasn't possible because of the restrictions that were in place. And so what I did and what I thought worked for me is to set a monthly timeline. So what I did was I set overarching broad goals that I wanted to achieve at the end of the year. And these were things like explore my career more through maybe 1 or 2 internships or real world life experience. And I kept it broad because that didn't really confine me to specific things, but also allowed me to explore a lot of different options. And so what I did within each of the months is that I looked at the goals and I asked myself, how can I achieve this month? What can I do? What online courses can I take? Can I leverage? What different programs can I roll in? Can I go to any events? Can I email someone to explore something further? And I just kept questioning myself, how can I achieve these goals that I set forth? And how can I make this a fulfilling year? And I think doing that on a month-to-month basis allowed me to reflect at the end of the month how I was able to achieve the goals that I set for that month. And it also allowed me to see, what did I enjoy? What did I love doing? What can I take away from this? And I slowly added to my journal that I started during the year to really kind of metacognitively think about the different things that I care about, and put that down so I can really distill my takeaways from the year as well. And so I think that process was really easy to allow me to, think about the bigger picture as you talked about, but also not make it too overwhelming by kind of drilling down on the things that I want to do.
Yeah, thank you.
I really like that. I've also had a period where I kind of tried that way of method of doing things, and I have friends who do that as well, and it's worked really well for them, but it actually doesn't work well for me. I found that I can't do this kind of overarching month-to-month goal thing, and mostly because I'm that kind of person, how you're describing, Jazz, that people are getting decision fatigue and they have so many things that they want to do. I find that the things I want to do change with time. And so trying to plan that far kind of ahead usually ends up being, it's really cool in the moment, and then it works for month 1 or works for month 2. And then afterwards, it's just not even something that's an option that I would want to pursue anymore. And that can kind of feel really scary as well. And so kind of something else that I think that I think that option could really work. And I would actually highly recommend people try that if they're if they don't have things that they know necessarily that they want to pursue, but if you have kind of a few things already in mind, hey, I want to make music and I want to start a startup and I have a side business, or I want to go hard on TikTok or whatever, I usually when deciding between multiple options and you're you really want to try picking 1 or 2 or doubling down, I think prioritizing and having priorities is really important. And the way that you can, I think, prioritize is really understanding where your motivations are coming from. So not even just the goal that you're trying to achieve, but the actual motivation behind those goals. And so what that means is something that I think it's really important to kind of, the question that can help answer that for someone is, for example, being okay, well, if I looked back at this entire year, what's just the one thing I want to gain from it? What's the one thing? And that could be for someone I need to make sure that I have enough savings. I need to be able to just make enough money. And I would say one thing or 2 things. What are the big 2 things that you want? And someone could be I want to make enough money and maybe I want to get really cool experience doing that. And so that could mean that all right, let's kind of maybe prioritize the side hustle instead. And it could also be I just want to gain experience. I just want to explore. And that can relieve the pressure of being one of my decisions is, do I start a side hustle for like money or whatever? And if that's not, if again, like coming back to your motivation, it's like, wait, I actually just want experiences right now. I don't want to worry too much about my finances. I feel like they're kind of okay enough for me to like go on and do what I was doing. Then that's something that's really helpful. So like really understanding your motivations, I think, can help out with like most decisions here, and especially decision fatigue. Because I find also when there's decision fatigue, like you're not just overwhelmed by the decision, but you're overwhelmed by the potential outcomes of that decision. You're like, well, if I had this, then XYZ could happen for me, or like ABC could happen for me. And then even thinking about like, well, which outcomes matter, and to determine that, I think going back to your goals and your motivations and your values and the overall experience you want is something that I find is usually helpful. And I would say the last thing to that is like, the question that always helps me is like, what would I regret not doing? So not what do I want to do, but what would I regret not doing? And that kind of, it's actually the same question, but the way that it's framed really changes the way that you can look at that scenario. So that's something that I would also like kind of just ask myself, and it actually does help me a lot. And the last thing I wanted to say is I really like that you guys both talked about journaling. Like AJ, I know you said that you started it this year, and Jazz, I know you said that you do some reflection. That is super key. Like I think with anything like decision fatigue wise, like it's just so helpful when you started to build an attunement with yourself. So even if anyone that's watching this or is going to watch a recording of this later, like if you don't have decision fatigue yet, a good way to help yourself for getting to that stage is journaling so much that you kind of like have a better understanding of yourself and a better understanding of just like how you've been feeling lately, what's been going on, and that attunement I find is also a little bit more helpful. That too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, this is all gold. Like, I think, and something I'm also finding is that gappers are starting to plan earlier. So like, I'm already speaking to gappers who are planning for September next year, which isn't that far away anymore. But, I think that's also really important because you don't like, again, a lot of gappers don't realize that it is a lot more intentional work than going into college, university, because it's really about, you need to identify your needs, identify your values, and then you can actually start to build from there. Okay, well, what are those needs for my gap year? What are the wants for my gap year? What would be nice? And also identifying like what's like a definite yes in your body and what's like a meh. Because I was actually just telling a gapper the other day, I was like, the feeling of like not doing enough never really goes away. So you just have to be clear on what it is that you need, and then also looking at whatever is being presented to you or what opportunities are available, and really understanding like how that feels in your body. Like if it's like, if you're like so excited and you can't say no, then it's probably a good one. But if you're like, it would be cool, might be something to consider. And that helps with that decision fatigue piece. I mean, you can do as many mind maps and journaling as you need. However, it's really about connecting with what you're writing down. So make sure you're going back to it. Make sure it's resonating with you. Make sure you're absorbing it. So this is really powerful. Thank you for sharing all this. I guess going back to kind of the beginning of our gap years. So what did you find were some of like kind of the big misconceptions that were kind of thrown your way, that might have played a role in like chatting with your parents or chatting with your community about your decision? What did that look like? Nazra, you go first. Okay, AJ, you go first.
Okay. So the question is, what misconceptions we had about the gap year, or misconceptions about a gap year. That one, I feel like time, like you think that it's a really long time, and then it's kind of not, and also that time is okay. So the time, like timing in gap year, it might kind of like seem normal maybe to the three of us because we've kind of been out of school, or we've taken the gap year, and then Jasmine, you've been out of school for a while, and so life's a little different. But when you're fresh out of high school and you're going into a gap year, like to have that much time during like your day, it's kind of weird. It's like really weird, and it's kind of hard to like perceive how much you can do in that year. And so my biggest misconception was honestly just like my scope and how much I, like when I was planning things, like really trying to figure out like how much could I actually do in a certain amount of time was a little like miscued. And so that's something that people will just kind of have to learn how to adjust to. The other thing is like, once you have like so much time, or when you have a bit more like free form time, so you might not even have so much of it, but you might, it's a little bit more unstructured. There's a lot of, I think, moments where people can feel unproductive. And that's really interesting because when you're going to school, for example, you're like 8 to 3 p.m. I have done so much. And then you're in a gap year and you're like, wait, it's noon and I feel like I kind of haven't done much myself, and that's confusing. So like, just like that was definitely kind of like an adjustment experience, like just having that like loss of structure. And I think like productivity is a very like interesting concept. And so I don't even have that many like opinions on it. I was just like, that's just like something that I noticed. And I think for every single person, they're going to have to figure out what their relationship to productivity is. Like productivity isn't, I think, just like a set way of doing something or a set amount of time on something or set amount of effort put in or outcomes. Like productivity is really dependent on like kind of like what you were saying, Jasmine, like how much you feel yes about something and then how much like you actually want to engage in it. And then like that's really such a subjective experience. And so that was one of my like kind of like I wouldn't say necessarily like a misconception, but also something that was like just kind of hard to perceive and understand going into it. And something I definitely had to like kind of understand for myself, like what my relationship with that was. Yeah, I don't know. What about you, AJ? What was that like for you?
Yeah, for me, it was like I was thinking along the lines that people who take a gap year are those who don't really know what's coming next. That, there's this degree of uncertainty that you should have. Whether that's not knowing where you want to go to university or what you want to study or what you want to do with your life. And it's like kind of this opportunity to figure things out. And while I do think that is very true, I do also think that it's possible for you to think you have everything figured out and still have the reason to pursue a gap year. And that was very much similar to my situation. I thought I knew that I wanted to study business and I wanted to do all these things. And I was pretty, pretty certain about all of the things that I decided. But even in that situation, I learned so much more about myself. I learned about the reshaping of my priorities and what it is that I fundamentally care about and how I can achieve that through career and other life's work. And I think it really gave me that opportunity to take a step back and look at things with a broader perspective. And so I think you can find value in a gap year, even though you don't necessarily fit that certain criteria that you think people who take a gap year have. I think that's definitely a big misconception. And yeah, that was the main one that really stood out to me.
I actually have something to add on to that as well. It's like you just like reminded me of something. Is when I was taking my gap year, also like a lot of people who were hearing about it, one of the things that I like, one of the kind of pushbacks that I would get from them was like so many people were like the most important experience for them in university was like the social experience. And people were like, well, if you're on a gap year, like you're going to miss out on so much of the social experience that you could be having if you didn't and weren't in a gap year. And that's something like I know like we've talked about this probably in like other gap year panels as well, is like how do you just like make friends in a gap year. And I found that like that was a big misconception too. Like there are actually a lot of communities, like especially if you're in the city or if you're close to a city, or even now like even just online, there's so many communities of people that you can find that like resonate with like the things that you're working on or the things that you're doing or like your interests and hobbies. And it's actually a lot more accessible, I think, to make friends outside of school than people think. And that was definitely kind of like a sort of misconception that was thrown at me while I was about to make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. Just to briefly add on to that as well, like even when you pursue all these different projects and all these different experiences, whether that's work related or volunteer efforts, you will find those communities. You will develop bonds with people who really care about the same things you care about. And I think that's really nice to have. Like throughout my gap year, I developed so many relationships and communities with people who had the same interests in me. And that was amazing because we could just talk for hours about, what we genuinely cared about. And I think, that process to really push yourself, to expose yourself to different types of people really, feeds into that personal and professional development that you'll have throughout the year as well.
Snaps to all of this. This is gold. I think it's like, spoiler alert, making friends as you age is challenging, honestly, because you're constantly in different spaces. You have to be intentional. Nazra also has a great video on this about making friends. Like, how do you like find the right spaces and connect with the right people, and decide if you want to invest in those friendships? Because yeah, there's definitely going to be friends that stick around after high school for sure, but it's challenging because most of your friends might be going off to college and university, and they're going to be, joining this melting pot of all of these students from everywhere, and life just continues forward, and sometimes we lose touch, and you do have to be intentional. But I mean, just to give a little plug, we have I'm just dropping this in the chat. We have oh, I think my name has been Michelle this whole time. We have a Discord community where you can connect with actually our nationwide community of Gappers. If I didn't mention before, Gappers are what we call Gapper students. So you are officially a Gapper. And there's also students on there. There's Alum. And then Michelle and I are in there as well, always kind of like dropping awesome gold and stuff in there. So definitely take a look. This is a great space to also there's accountability groups in there. People are planning travels together. So, this is a great place to start. Like, this is a community of like-minded people who are experiencing something very similar. So this is a good place to start off. And AJ, you also, you were talking about perspective. And I think this is so important, because when we're in high school, we think we know everything. We think we know everything and we've got it all figured out and we're just the coolest thing ever. And then, yeah, when you walk out into your gap year and you suddenly have these random 8 hours a day that you never had before, you're like, oh my gosh, like, I have so much thinking to do. There's so many things I want to, I need to learn how to do my laundry and cook, let alone decide what I want to do with my career and what program I want to choose. So I think this is really important. I've never had someone mention the time misconception. And I think that's really, really valuable and important to reflect on, is if you had those 8 hours of a day back, what would you do with them? How could you use them to better yourself and your life and work towards your bigger goals? Because it's a lot of time, and you can accomplish so much in it, but you also don't want to, again, over what's the word I'm looking for? It's too early over here.
Overextend, maybe?
Thank you. You don't want to overextend yourself with 400 goals and then feel disappointed at the end of the year. And this is why the planning stage of your gap year, whether it is a year in advance, which is never really highly recommended anyways, because life is constantly changing, pandemic or not, your life will change regardless in those kind of 12 months. But whether you do it like that or you do it in the smaller chunks, that's a way to make it digestible, obviously, and help you kind of work towards those bigger goals and accomplishing them and feeling good about it and celebrating it. But then again, there's also going to be times where it's challenging, and you might face things that make you want to burst into tears and make you question what you're doing. And, if our amazing Gap alum would be so vulnerable to maybe share some of those experiences with our community, because everyone hits it and it's hard when you get there. So to hear from someone who's been there, I think would be really, really valuable. Sorry,
AJ, you can take this one off.
Me? Okay. So just to recap, just kind of events that really pushed us to our edge and made us reshape our thinking looking forward, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So for me, I was really into trading throughout my year, and kind of looking into investing and cryptocurrencies and things along that line. And so that was something that I really, grappled with throughout the year. I kept experimenting and trying new strategies and trying to learn in different ways, looking through YouTube channels, online courses through Coursera, and more. And so that was something that I really devoted a lot of time to. But what happened throughout the year is I started to develop more risky trading habits. in specific, like, leverage trading or like futures trading, which is a lot more risky, particularly with cryptocurrencies. And I ended up losing a significant, and initially it was working. I really, made substantial profits, and I'm like, wow, I can really, do something. This is insane, because I've never really made money for myself. And so that was really like, it felt really good at first. So that was, kind of the beginning of these roller coaster of emotions. But then one day, and after doing this for months on months, I ended up losing everything I made, and even more than that. And that really took a toll on me. It really impacted me after spending such a significant time learning, and I was thinking that I was doing it right this whole time. It really hurt to see that significant amount of money lost, especially when it's something you've worked so hard on and it's your personal money. But then, after taking a step back and, going back to my journal, trying to understand these emotions and why did this mistake happen in the first place? Why did I develop such risky trading patterns? And not really blame myself, but try to understand what went wrong and how can I change moving forward. And I think, with all these, problems and obstacles that you'll come across throughout your year and inevitably throughout life, it's important to not be too hard on yourself. I know in the moment it's hard to, kind of remind yourself that, but always try to take a step back. Try to take a step back to understand why the problem occurred, what you can do about it, and what are the key takeaways. There's no point, always thinking about what you regretted. Rather, try to see it as an opportunity to grow further. And I think that's something that I really learned throughout my year.
That sounds like quite an experience. and I can definitely I don't trade really, but I can't imagine just especially for someone who's just like starting off to also be like making money and losing money. It just feels like there's like a lot of heightened emotions kind of experience kind of going on. So wow, that's really interesting. For me, I one of the things I think over just like the past year is last fall, I was just really demotivated, or it was just very hard for me to do certain things. So I a lot of it was just winter. It's dark out all the time, and it's just the winter zone. The other thing for me is I had actually moved out downtown Toronto, and then I went back to living with my parents at the pandemic, and that was definitely an adjustment experience. And I love my parents, but sometimes it's just really just hard being in their household, and more so because I don't know about I'm sure actually a few people could relate to this, just being especially a female in a brown family, even education, taking a gap year was a really really big deal for my parents, and even still they still talk about it, because education is so important in the culture, so important in the family, and then so important and such a big expectation of me as also just as a girl going through and being in Canada, and so just being back home, there was just it felt I wouldn't say pressure exactly, but it just felt a lot, and I was trying to move and work on certain projects, and it was just very hard, and I don't know, I just called it a slump. It was just a period of things were just really hard to do, and honestly, I don't even know how I really got out of it. I can't even say meditate or yoga or anything like that. I find in those periods you can have certain habits, and I do have certain habits, and I met a journal and stuff like that. But when you're experiencing something like that, your habits sometimes don't, they're there as constants, but they don't always are the things that pull you out. I found for me, anytime I've experienced something like that, the most positive and helpful thing that helps me is just understanding that this is temporary. Really just reminding myself I'm just going to hold space for this experience, and I'm going to hold space for this emotion. And so if I'm going through it, I'm going through it. But it is temporary, and I just have to let myself wake up the next day and go through it again, and just know that if I can just wake up and I can make myself a meal and maybe journal if I want to or not, or sit outside for 10 minutes and just sit outside and stare at something, and then go about my day and maybe not even be as productive or productive at all, that's okay. And I don't have to fix this. Sometimes just having the pressure to fix the thing you're going through can just be a lot. And so most of the time for me, it's just being all right, it's just happening. It's happening. I'm gonna ride this wave. It's not a pleasant wave, but that's kind of just what we've kind of mentioned that, as Jasmine, you were saying, and AJ, like you, both of you kind of use the phrase of like, these are the things that just kind of happen in life. And I feel like that's kind of just what the experience is. You go through these like roller coasters, and you have periods where like things are really awesome. And sometimes you have periods where things are like not feeling that great. And it's hard to get to the point where you can just be like, okay, cool, we're flowing. But I just tried to like, again, remember that it's temporary. And I think everyone that will probably go through that experience is going to be trying to understand it and going to be trying to reflecting upon it and whatever, and doing all those practices. Sometimes you just need to cut yourself some slack too, and just be like, all right, we're just going to do this for a few days or a few weeks or something. And then eventually kind of like get out of the slump, because you've given yourself space to fully experience.
Yeah, 100%. Life isn't full of high moments. Like there's going to be lows, there's going to be middle ground, and I think just knowing that it's going to happen is probably the best way to prepare for it, because then when it happens, you're like, oh, it's happening. And then you have already become self-aware, and you can take intentional steps forward. And I think what's also like, I don't want to sound so cheesy, but like you're never the only one going through it. So even when it feels like nothing's going my way, and like why am I being challenged right now? Like what did I do to deserve this? Like I'm supposed to be having the best year of my life. Like this is a huge transition, and I think we don't stress that enough. Like you've been in school your entire life, and now you are becoming a young adult and moving into this next phase that is kind of terrifying, but it's also so exciting and such a joyous time. But just because we're not celebrating every moment of it doesn't mean that it's not special and it's not supporting your future growth. And I think the two pieces I'm hearing from both of you is, AJ, it's like being intentional and taking that step back and just acknowledging that it's happening. And then Nazra also like a little bit of that, but also like taking it one day at a time. You don't need to have all the answers immediately. And I think this is also where community plays a really big role, because again, you're not alone. You're not alone in this journey, and you don't have to do it alone. And I think that's another misconception I feel like I've heard, is that it's like a gap year. You just have to figure it all out on your own. And that's not true. There's so much support, especially here. So, you don't need to feel like these moments are going to be so overwhelming that you won't be able to push through, because there is community, there is support. I'm curious to, I know that a lot of students of color, like one of the biggest topics is navigating like parent dynamics, both like before, during, and after. Nazra, you've spoken a bit about your before journey. AJ, I do not know. I would love to hear your story around like getting your parents involved in this journey, but I'd also love to kind of know what those kind of highlights and lowlights were along the journey, and how you got your parents to understand the different pieces of your gap year. And then also coming out of your gap year, how that might have come, full circle. How did that kind of come together in I guess, what's the word looking for? Kind of supporting your relationship, especially if you were like living out and then coming back and there was a pandemic in the middle. But just curious to what that relationship with your parents was like pre-gap year, during your gap year, and then coming out of your gap year.
Yeah, I can start. So, for me, like pre-gap year, it was difficult. Like my mom was like, "It's not happening. You're not doing this." And honestly, like I'm not gonna lie. Like the way that I made the decision to like move forward with the gap year was kind of like, "Mom, I love you, but like I have to do this for myself, and you're just gonna have to trust me on this one." And I had a plan. Like I knew what I was doing in the gap year. I had the startup job lined up and stuff like that. But I actually did make that like final decision without their like complete approval. And like that is something that I just had to be like, it's not something that I'm like saying I recommend for everyone or at all, but it was just like, for me, it was like, I'm 18. Like, I just feel like this is like the ownership that I have over myself. And I really feel sound in this decision. And it was so funny because like 2 weeks later, I hear her like in the kitchen on a call with my aunt, and she's like, "Yeah, Nazra's taking a gap year and blah, blah, blah." And like, she's like super like suddenly okay with it and stuff. But I know you said that you heard a bit of my like the before story, and I really did like that final decision, like I did like kind of just have to be like, again, like I'm taking over ownership over this. But when I was making the decision, like I sat down with my parents and I walked them through the entire thing. I had like multiple conversations with my mom. I did like a little exercise with her. Like it was really like, it was just a effort kind of experience. And, still wasn't okay with it. But I think then through the gap year, they just kind of got to see everything that I was doing and that I was making effort. And even when I like hadn't made effort completely, like they just knew like that I was trying. And I think my mom especially could see that. And so like just being able to see your kid kind of go through it was, I think, helpful for us. And I kept her in the loop as much as I could on things and try to over communicate like throughout the entire time. So that was really helpful. And then like now it's like they were just able to like see that I'm okay. Like that was just fine. She went through the experience and she's okay. Like things didn't blow up. And like she's in one piece. So that was really helpful. Like to just, I think they just like for them, and I don't know, AJ, if you could relate, but it was just like a time thing. Like they just kind of needed to see it happen and see it unfold. And throughout the process, like just trying to be as communicative as you can, and like open in your communication and giving them updates every now and then is always like something that I think is really helpful. So yeah, that was kind of my experience. And right now my mom still is like, Naz, like I talking to me about school all the time. But like she's still nudging me about school stuff. But at least she just understands that I'm an independent person, and that was really helpful. And I think the gap year really helped out with that as well.
Yeah, I can completely agree with like all the tips that you've said, especially with open communication and constantly kind of keeping your parents in the loop. I think that's really important. And to just start off with my pre-gap year experience with kind of talking to my parents with the misconceptions of a gap year, they were more understanding, I think, more so because of that pandemic. And so they were understanding that this was a decision that makes sense. And in fact, they even in some regards pushed me to make that decision. So it was a bit of a different experience in that regard for me compared to Nazra. My parents were open to me doing a gap year, but nonetheless, they were still skeptical that I would waste time or not really, make the most productive use of my year or really explore myself as much as I wanted to. And I think even within that, there were some goals of my gap year that my parents may not have necessarily agreed with. If I, wanted to do internships or career-related stuff, as well as Coursera courses, that would be perfectly acceptable. But there may be a bit more tension if I wanted to, say, travel around Thailand or things around that nature. So I guess it also came down to the specificities of the different activities that I wanted to pursue. And so that kind of moves into during the gap year. And I think constantly throughout, as the months went by, I would constantly talk to my parents about what I've been up to, what I've been doing, what I've been learning, both within professionally, also personally, and all the new people I've been meeting. And I think they really found and they could really see that really changed me, and it allowed me to learn in so many different ways, and that I was genuinely and authentically excited about the different things I was doing. And even beyond like work related or career related stuff, I would talk about, the different things that I would do with my new friends that I made, and, exploring Thailand in different ways. And they were also, as I explained that and as I expressed that, they were also very open to allowing me to continue that. So, going traveling in Thailand, where obviously it was safe given the pandemic, and things along that line. So I think looking back on the gap year, they thought that it was a good, use of my time, just because online school wouldn't have been ideal. But then again, I don't necessarily know how that would have played out in a different year.
So a little bit of context as well there. Yeah, and just another great video. I'm like your biggest fan club, both of you. Another great video from our CanGap ambassadors. Anuj talks about his adventures through Thailand during the pandemic and kind of this idea of localized travel, which is, for anyone, because when I was in high school, an idea of a gap year wasn't really like a thing, but there was like, I knew that it was a bigger, in Europe, and it was kind of this opportunity to go and travel. And that's kind of what all it was associated with. And, I understand that that's still, still a perspective of what a gap year could be. And I don't want people who are looking to use their gap year to travel to feel discouraged, because you can still, like, Canada is a massive country and there is so much to learn and explore. And I think it's funny, like, reflecting now, like 12 years out of high school, like, there, it's I wish that I had spent more time traveling across Canada and, like, learning a language skill, like improving your French, going and learning about our crazy history, because trust me, the history you learn in high school is not fully what's going on. And I think it's so important right now for, like, the reconciliation aspect and understanding our Indigenous history. And there's also so much opportunity that stems from that. So thinking, like, if you're feeling like, and this is a total side note, but if you're feeling like, how am I going to be able to travel? Like, think about localized travel. Canada is fantastic. And it sounds like, I think the biggest takeaway here is also, like, over communication. Like, it sounds really funny to say that, but, like, it is. It's like, how can you ensure that your parents are, like, fully brought into your experiences, so that can be kind of just like walking them through things, or every day kind of giving them a recap. I think that's really, really important, especially because, I'll be honest, I think that it's harder if your parents don't support you. So if you're challenged by these initial conversations that aren't really going well, one, watch Nazra's video. Two, find ways to kind of just keep them really close to the experience, so that as you either are leading into your gap year, or when you kick it off, or even in the middle of it, by then, just knowing that they understand where you're at. It doesn't have to be a full agreement. It's just being able to connect on where everyone's at, because again, you're a young adult. Like, this is your time to start paving your own path. And if you're able to identify, and again, it kind of goes back full circle to the start of our conversation. Like, once you identify your goals and your values and what this experience is going to look like, then it's easier to communicate. It's easier to lead it. It's easier for your parents to see, like, there is intention behind this. I see what they're doing here, instead of thinking that you're just, like, sitting and watching Netflix for a year, because that's going to get very boring very quickly. And I'm sure and once they start to see you taking action, it will make a difference in that dynamic. So especially if you're living at home during your gap year. Awesome. Before we kind of start to wind down, I'm curious throughout your gap year, was there any, like, awesome resources or tools that you access, or programs even? It sounds like you both kind of had kind of like your own thing going on, but curious if there was anything that was really supportive during your gap year that you could share with our community.
Before we answer, I just have to quickly let you know, I'm actually in, like, a working space, and I was supposed to they were open until 9:30, but I'm being asked to leave a little early. So I kind of, like, will have to go in, like, a minute. I'm
No
sorry.
problem. We can leave going early. No problem.
Okay. Sorry, guys. But a quick resources for me was, I really, like, through my gap year, obviously the CanGap Association, like, I had conversations with Michelle about my gap year, like, in the beginning as well. And that was just really helpful. And, like, I would say, like, even us, to be honest, like, anyone that's watching this, like, if AJ and I are both making, like, the YouTube videos, and, like, if you have comments or questions, like, you could totally, like, answer underneath those, or ask those underneath those, and, like, we could totally answer questions there. And then other, like, quick resources, like, AJ had mentioned Coursera, and I think, like, Coursera, Udemy are great, like, places to find, like, online crash courses on any almost subject. Like, you can learn a lot through there. You can learn a lot through just YouTube, like, YouTube anything, and you'll be able to learn something about it through there. So those were some really good resources. And then one other quick one, and I mentioned this in my, like, making friends video as well, is, like, just, like, finding, like, Facebook groups, or, like, finding, like, Twitter groups, or, like, groups of, like, people that are and, like, obviously there are ways to, like, see if they're verified as well, and, like, Discord groups out there of, like, little communities is really helpful. Like, even if you just Google, like, Discord, and then, like, insert anything of your interest, like, you can find a lot of, like, interesting, like, communities there that you can enter, that are open to enter, and, like, you can just learn a lot through those. So, like, some of those are just really great, like, resources and places. And then the last one that I will say before I have to go is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is underrated. You can cold outreach so many people. I know AJ mentioned that as well, that he would, like, email people, like, LinkedIn is a very underrated place to find other people who might have similar interests from you that you could learn from. And like, you can create a lot of opportunities from connecting with people that you don't know on LinkedIn, who are working in the areas that you would love to work into. So I would definitely like utilize LinkedIn a lot more as well if anyone's interested. And that could be for anything. That could be for music and art and science and trying to get an internship, etc. Yeah, those are my quick list of resources. I do have to head out, but thank you so much for having me. It was really like cool to hear from both of you, and even Jasmine. Like, there's some things that you said, I was like, I want to talk to you more about that and like know more about this experience. When you talked about the pandemic, I was like, it's pretty cool. So and I like can't believe that you're living in India right now. That's really sick. Yeah, it's really great chatting with you guys. I gotta go, but
no problem, Nazra. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Lovely hearing from you, and lovely to meet you finally.
Okay. Bye guys.
Bye. Great meeting you. Yeah, just to add on to the resources, I think Nazra covered it quite extensively, but she talked about Coursera, and I think that was a great resource for me to just kind of be able to access so many online university accredited courses in whatever way that I wanted to. So I could access any course from the specifics of the stock market to marketing techniques, inbound marketing, and I could just really explore what I genuinely care about. And it gave me this platform to really try different things and watch different videos and then, do the quizzes. And at the end of the year, I ended up like completing 26 different courses because I was just so motivated by all of the things that I was studying. Yeah, I was just so interested, and it just motivated me to keep pursuing and look for new things that I could do. And so other websites like that is, of course, Udemy. But also I discovered a website called Forage. And I think that was really interesting in that it's not necessarily an online course that, instills these different theoretical concepts. It's a virtual internship program, they call it. So it's technically giving you different tasks, and you have to complete it for a company, a real world company, and they give you data sets or different kind of stimuli depending on the internship you're doing and the nature of it, and you can really work through and see what real world businesses are doing. And so I think that's a great way to really explore different industries really seamlessly. And just beyond that, I really agree with kind of exploring different communities. And so whether that's through Reddit or Discord or really finding a way to connect yourself to different things you care about, something that really worked for me was this app called Flipboard, and kind of like organizing my news related to what I really care about. And it really let me, seamlessly look through everything that I care about throughout the world, just things along those lines, like reorienting my life and, even social media, like following pages that I care about outside of, just the normal social media stuff. I think just orienting all of my resources around me to remind me of what it is that is important to me, what I care about, and just making sure all of that aligns, I think is really important. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I love Flipboard. It's great. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm curious, before we head out, because I know that you had a program that you deferred to. So I'm curious, like, how did your gap year impact, one, you going into higher education, and two, actually start there. One, how did it impact you going into higher education?
I think the main way it impacted me is it really, gave me a different perspective going into school. Before, as I talked about, is very academic in nature, and I would just understand the theoretical concepts, try to perfect it, and then study for the exam. And I think it kind of reshaped my way of thinking because I'm coming here to learn, to be educated, to apply it in the real world. And so why am I missing that connection? And so I think it's this having, real world experience and knowing what people are doing in real world companies and what I potentially might be doing in the future. When I go back to school after that, I can really dissect and synthesize all of the information that I'm presented in through the lens of what real world people would do. And I think that really contextualizes everything. It makes me understand, is this important? How is this important? How can I apply this in the real world? It really allows me to question things a lot more. And although, taking a step back from academics may have, affected some study habits here and there, I think as soon as I came back into school, it took like a week or two, but I was really able to, get back into things. And I think being motivated by constantly learning, which the gap year even further emphasized my passion for, makes it that much easier to do so.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like, I think this is such an important piece, is like we absorb so much information, but we rarely have the time to really implement it and understand how it works in practice. And your gap year is kind of this great opportunity to do that, to learn how do you take all this information and put it into practice.
Yeah.
So that's really, really wonderful. And it obviously didn't change your approach to like your program, or did it change like maybe your interests as you went into school? Did it influence course decisions?
Yeah. So in terms of the major that I was choosing, it maintained the same because I really, was very passionate about business and the multifaceted nature of it. So I was quite certain that I wanted to continue pursuing that. But what I did learn is that I was also interested in marketing, and that was never something that I really considered at all. But after doing that internship, I understood the specific different functions of business and what I'm particularly appealed to. And I think that creative aspect of marketing mixed with, an understanding of data analytics and consumer behavior, all of that feeds into marketing decisions that impact the companies in so many ways, was intrinsically super interesting to me. And so I was very finance and economics oriented before, but now I think I'm more leaning towards the marketing and, leadership and human relations aspects of business.
Right.
And so I think that was really important in kind of reshaping the courses that I may be taking in the near future.
Amazing. Yeah. Yes, I love it. I think that it's just like this incredibly amazing experience that just is helping you push forward in your education, in your career, in who you are, who you're becoming. Thank you so, so much, Anuj, for sharing with us this evening. I really
Of course.
appreciate it.
Thank you so
And
much
of
for
course,
having me.
thank you. Yeah, and to Nazra, who's left us already, another
Yeah.
thank you. This has been such a beautiful conversation. Like an hour went by so quickly. To our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. I'll be posting this video on our YouTube. So if you're watching on our YouTube, hello. Below you'll find links to our CanGap Ambassador playlist. And if you would like to learn more about some of the tools that we have available here at CanGap, so we have more of like a self-led planning tool, which is our Gap Year Toolkit. So this is an opportunity to really like understand what you're getting into, the scope of it, how to approach it with your parents, your community, some of the things you want to be looking out for yourself, and then also how to actually go about planning this and getting the resources and support to actually plan a purposeful gap year that's aligned with your values and your goals. And then, of course, you get the support of myself and Michelle. We have our amazing Gapper community. And if you want to take it a level up, there's all these skills that you learn in your gap year that go unnoticed, honestly, because experiential education is still not at the level of when we're talking about formal education. You learn about yourself and your self-care, and you learn to find opportunities, and you learn new skills in those opportunities, whether you are taking an internship or a job or you're doing online courses. And our Game Plan membership is not only a nationwide community kind of gappers working together and celebrating the small wins and going through these notions with each other. It also provides you a online platform where you can actually go and get certified. So we actually offer micro certifications in everything from career planning to mentorship to financial literacy to self-awareness and self-care, like things that have for too long gone unnoticed, but make a massive difference in you entering the workforce, entering higher education, and providing endless value to your community. So we actually certify you in those. There's 7 different modules. And then after completing those, you can actually earn the Student of Leadership and Humanity Award, which is an international award recognizing that you actually did something meaningful and powerful and transformative on your gap year. And Anuj, I know that you are one of our alum earners of the award. And, I'd love, just before we sign up, I know I've gone a little over time, but micro certifications are something that are really blowing up in the world right now. And I think it's so important to acknowledge them because there's so many of these skills that we have that are so hard to express. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to how these micro certifications and credentials have supported you in your journey.
Yeah, I think it's really important because as time goes by, even when you're applying for jobs, for example, people don't really get to understand your full story. They don't get to understand what you're about and what you stand for beyond the numbers and quick descriptions that you can put on. And I think these micro certifications allow you to tell that larger story because they represent so many different facets, from financial literacy, as you mentioned, to self-care. I think those are really important things that too often go unnoticed. And I think they go unnoticed because we simply don't have the time to look into that. And I think that's very sad, because those are things that are incredibly important. And I think any opportunity that you may have to be able to reflect that in a way through these certifications that you mentioned is an exceptional opportunity to really share what you're about, more than the numbers can kind of share.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And I've dropped the link for the game plan to learn more about it. It'll be also in the links below for our YouTube video. Before I take up any more of your time, Anuj, you also have a flight tomorrow. You're going to Thailand. And have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining me again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope you have a great night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.